What would you do if your mother-in-law smiled at you every morning while quietly erasing you from your own life? I used to believe love would be enough, that being kind, being patient, being the woman he chose would earn me a place at the table. But some tables are set long before you arrive. Some seats are never meant for you, no matter how carefully you sit. She told me I didn't understand legacy, that I didn't come from the right kind of family, didn't know how things were supposed to be. And for a while, I let her guide me. I thought she was helping. But the truth was quieter than that, colder. She wasn't helping me fit in. She was slowly, precisely cutting me out. And by the time I realized what she'd done, it was too late to scream. So I chose something else. I chose to take my life back without ever raising my voice. Before I married Julian, I never cared for things like pedigree or legacy. I came from a small town near the coast where the only legacy that mattered was whether your grandfather taught you how to patch a boat or not. My mother raised me alone. She worked nights at the hospital, packed my lunches with sticky notes full of encouragement, and taught me that strength didn't have to be loud. When I met Julian at a gallery opening, I was drawn to the quiet in him. He was measured, thoughtful, nothing like the men I'd known. He told me my honesty was refreshing. I told him he felt like peace. We fit, not perfectly, but meaningfully. When he proposed, I didn't think twice. I believed that love, real love, had room for differences. Then I met Eleanor. She was composed, regal even. Her presence filled the room before she said a word. She smiled when Julian introduced me, but her eyes lingered a second too long. Not cruel, just calculating. The kind of look that reads the label on a bottle of wine before pouring. She welcomed me, of course. She always used the right words, always hosted with grace. But there was something in the way she corrected me gently, insistently, that made me shrink a little each time. I didn't belong, not really. The Whitmore estate had rules I didn't know existed. You wore pearls on Sundays. You never poured your own tea. You answered questions about children with vague optimism and zero finality. I tried, at first. I wore the clothes she sent, let her pick the venue for our wedding, smiled through toasts I wasn't allowed to give. It wasn't just tradition, it was choreography, and I was the one always half a step behind. Julian didn't see it, not then. He was raised in this. To him, Eleanor's involvement was just love expressed in high standards. He told me to give her time, that she wanted the best for us, that she didn't mean anything by it. But I felt it, the careful way she reworded my sentences at dinner, the way my choices became family discussions. When I mentioned returning to work after the honeymoon, she said kindly that perhaps I should take a year to adjust. I agreed. I kept agreeing, until I couldn't recognize the sound of my own decisions anymore. She didn't break me. That would have been too obvious. Eleanor was far too elegant for destruction. What she did was quieter. She erased me, in whispers, in corrections, in concern. And for a while, I let her. I thought it was the price of becoming a Whitmore. But what I didn't realize then was that I was never becoming one of them. I was being replaced, carefully, permanently. It started with a slip, a small, offhand comment from Julian after dinner one night. We were talking about starting a family. Nothing serious, just the way couples do when they've been married a while and everyone around them starts asking. I said I was ready to have the conversation. He paused, looked almost uncomfortable, then said, "Maybe wait until Mother feels things are more settled." Mother, not we, not I. I heard the word, but let it pass. For the moment. Later that week, while Julian was out of town for a conference, I went to the study to look for one of my old journals. I hadn't written in months, but I missed my voice. Instead, I found a folder thick, with the Whitmore family crest on the front. Inside were trust documents, updated last quarter, pages of conditions and clauses I didn't recognize. My name had been moved, not erased, exactly, just shifted, detached from anything binding. It was the family trust Julian and I had discussed when we got married. He'd said it would go to our children, that my name would be part of the legacy. But here it was, restructured, with language that now hinged everything on Eleanor's approval of future heirs and compliance with family values. My stomach turned cold. The ink wasn't dry yet, and I could still hear her voice saying I should take time to mature into the role. I didn't confront Julian right away. I wasn't even angry yet. I felt something quieter, like being submerged, like realizing the floor beneath me had been rotting for years, and I'd only just heard the first crack. The final confirmation came in the form of an email. I wasn't meant to see it. It was still open on Julian's desktop. He rarely shut anything down. It was from a private consultant, fertility and family planning, with behavioral assessments attached, notes on emotional readiness, influence of upbringing, and potential instability due to motherless childhood. It was about me, commissioned by Eleanor. She had paid someone to convince Julian that I wasn't fit to carry on the Whitmore line, and he had listened. Maybe not fully, maybe not consciously, but he'd let the seed grow. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or pack a bag or shatter a glass like the movies teach you to. I stood in our bedroom, barefoot, hands still, and I looked out the window at the garden Eleanor had designed herself. And I knew, in the deepest, coldest part of me, that this wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about control. And I had just lost mine. But not forever. There's something clarifying about betrayal. It strips away softness. It teaches you how to see. In the days that followed, I became quieter, more deliberate. I didn't let on that I knew. I smiled at Eleanor during brunches, complimented her centerpieces, nodded through her subtle comments about legacy and image. I let her believe I was still the girl she could shape. That I hadn't noticed, the scaffolding of my life being rebuilt in her design. But inside, I had changed. I reached out to Beatrix Geller under the pretense of an art endowment. We'd met once before at a museum fundraiser. She was older, sharp as glass, with a voice like velvet and a reputation for being politely difficult. She used to handle parts of the Whitmore estate's legal affairs before Eleanor had her quietly replaced. I suspected there was history there, and I was right. Over coffee in a quiet part of town, I told Beatrix the truth. Not everything, just enough. She listened, then leaned back, folded her hands, and said, "The Whitmores build their legacy like a wall, but old walls crack." She helped me request documents the family kept locked away in private archives, some through legal channels, others through connections she hadn't used in years. What we found wasn't criminal, not exactly, but it was revealing. A trail of adjustments made to the trust over the years, each one narrowing who was allowed to inherit, to participate, to belong. But then came the fracture, a clause from decades ago signed by Julian's grandfather. It stated that no trust amendment could legally stand without the informed consent of any current heir with marital ties, meaning me, meaning the changes Eleanor made were invalid if I challenged them. And I would, but not yet. I began asking Julian small questions, quiet ones, how he felt about children now, what he thought about legacy, if he'd ever wondered what his life might look like outside the boundaries his mother had drawn. He responded carefully at first, as if waking from something heavy, but I saw it, a flicker. Doubt, maybe, or guilt. I left little seeds everywhere. I started painting again, leaving canvases in the hallway where he'd see them. I took meetings for museum projects without asking permission. I reclaimed small pieces of myself, not defiantly, but as if I'd never given them up. And Eleanor? She remained blissfully unaware. She saw what she wanted to see, a subdued daughter-in-law adjusting to tradition. But I wasn't adjusting. I was preparing. Quietly, completely. Because strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it waits. The idea came to me while walking the south corridor of the Whitmore estate, where portraits of the family's women hung in solemn silence. The gallery was curated with precision, but I noticed something. Not a single woman had a story of her own. Every caption referenced a marriage, a father, or a son. Not one legacy stood on its own legs. So I proposed an event, a curated symposium at the estate titled Architects of Legacy, the Women Who Built What History Forgot. Asterisk, I framed it as a philanthropic opportunity for the Whitmores to celebrate untold female stories. Eleanor, ever image conscious, agreed instantly. She loved the idea of cultural relevance dressed as benevolence. While she planned her guest list and floral arrangements, Beatrix filed the injunction. The motion blocked any further changes to the trust without a court review and quietly cited the grandfather clause. It was technical, airtight, and delivered under the radar. Eleanor wouldn't be notified until it became public record the following week. We timed it perfectly. At the same time, Beatrix and I contacted a discreet heritage blogger with a passion for family line scandals. Using old records, we revealed a quiet truth. Eleanor's mother had been adopted, a fact Eleanor had buried long ago. In Whitmore tradition, that meant her own lineage wasn't as pure as she claimed. The blogger planned to release the article on the morning of the symposium, not as an attack, just as a historical curiosity. I moved through the estate like smoke, composed, present, supportive. I rehearsed my presentation for the symposium in the same room Eleanor once told me I should avoid speaking too much in. I could feel the energy shifting. Julian noticed it too. He began asking questions, hesitant ones, but questions nonetheless. He asked about the painting I'd been working on, about the late-night meetings with Beatrix. I told him I was learning how to make space for myself again, that I hoped he'd want to be part of that. He didn't resist. He just listened. The night before the event, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest room wearing a simple black dress and no pearls. I stared at my reflection, not to admire it, but to recognize it. The woman looking back wasn't waiting for approval. She was ready. The stage was set. The pieces had been placed without a sound. Eleanor believed she would stand at the podium the next day, draped in applause, wrapped in the comfort of her control. But what she didn't know was that I hadn't come to play her game. I had built a new one, and she was already losing. The morning of the symposium arrived, shrouded in mist, as if even the estate could feel what was coming. Guests began arriving just after 10. Museum curators, foundation donors, local historians, and the kind of family friends who wore discretion like a second skin. Eleanor greeted each of them with practiced charm, moving through the room like a monarch at court. She wore a dove-gray silk dress, pearls gleaming at her throat, her smile fixed and impenetrable. I stayed close, invisible, and observant, just as I had for years. The event began in the East Hall, the one with the marble columns and stained glass windows Eleanor insisted represented legacy. A string quartet played softly in the background. Beatrix stood near the back, eyes steady, folder in hand. I stepped up to the podium after Eleanor's introduction, her words full of pride and polish. She had no idea what was coming. My presentation began like any other. I spoke of forgotten women in history, their contributions, their quiet erasures. I spoke of lineage, of legacy, of how often names get remembered while voices are lost. Then I changed the slide. The room shifted. On the screen appeared a scanned document, yellowed with age, signed by Julian's grandfather, the clause, the one Eleanor never expected anyone to find. I explained calmly how the family trust had been altered without proper consent, how legality requires transparency, especially when tied to inheritance. My voice never rose, never faltered. Another slide, this one from the Heritage blog, now live, the adoption records. Eleanor's mother, taken in during wartime, raised as a Whitmore but never legally adopted into the bloodline. I didn't embellish, I didn't accuse, I simply read the facts. Then I turned to Eleanor. She hadn't moved. Her hands were perfectly still in her lap, fingers pressed together like she was holding something fragile inside. I said her name softly, and then I said mine. Not as her daughter-in-law, not as someone who married into a name, as someone who had earned her own. You taught me that legacy was everything, so I started writing mine. Beatrix stepped forward with the injunction, calm, precise. She handed Eleanor the papers. A single breath passed between us, and then Julian stood. He didn't look at his mother, he looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said, not just for what he'd allowed, but for how long he'd been asleep. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I simply nodded. Because this was not a victory born from rage. It was the quiet reclamation of everything I'd been denied. Eleanor stood, slowly. Her face was unreadable. She walked out without a word, heels echoing across marble. She didn't slam a door, she didn't scream. That was never her style. But the silence she left behind was deafening. And for the first time since I'd entered that house, it belonged to me. After the symposium, everything shifted quietly, but irreversibly. Eleanor withdrew from public life almost immediately. Her absence was explained with vague words like overwhelmed and fatigued, though everyone knew. The story had spread further than I expected. The article was picked up by a larger publication that ran a feature on the illusion of legacy and how women like Eleanor curated history like a painting, brushing over anything that didn't match the frame. The Whitmore Foundation's board met privately within the week. She was asked to step down from her advisory role, not officially removed. Of course, that would be too confrontational. Instead, they offered her an honorary title, which in their language meant stay quiet, stay gone. Julian was slower to move, but he moved. We began therapy, not to repair what she had done, but to face what he had allowed. He listened more now. He asked questions. Sometimes he sat in silence and let the weight of things fall where they had always belonged. We spoke openly about children, not as a requirement or a legacy, but as a choice ours alone. I didn't know yet if I wanted to be a mother, but for the first time, I felt like I had a say in that future. Beatrix continued to work in the background, ensuring the original structure of the trust was restored. My name was reinstated without condition. Any clause tied to approval or tradition was struck out. What remained was clean, legal, mine. Eleanor sent a letter, handwritten, elegant, no apology, no confession, just 3 words on the final page. "You won, Nora." Asterisk. I read them once, then set the letter in the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her blessing. Her power had always relied on silence, and I no longer owed her mine. The estate, once curated to her perfection, began to loosen. Julian moved the portraits. We repainted the halls. The staff stopped speaking in whispers when I walked through the rooms. I had been erased so carefully, so politely, that even I almost believed it. But now, everything she tried to write me out of had become part of my story. Not because I demanded it, but because I took it back piece by piece without letting her see the fire until it was already lit. It was early spring when I planted the dahlias. The garden had once been Eleanor's kingdom, every flower chosen for symbolism, symmetry, and color theory. Even the soil had rules. But now, with her absence lingering like a silence no one wanted to break, the space felt different. Not ruined, just unclaimed. I chose dahlias because they were my mother's favorite. Bold, complicated, unapologetically layered. They didn't ask for permission to bloom, and they didn't match anything in Eleanor's vision. That was the point. Julian knelt beside me, sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There was something healing about the act of planting something where control had once ruled. About getting your hands dirty in a place where you were once told to stay polished. Each root I buried felt like a sentence rewritten. Each handful of soil a name restored. When we were done, I stood back and looked at the uneven rows. No symmetry, no plan. Just life honest, messy, growing in its own way. And for the first time in that garden, I felt peace. Not the quiet of suppression, but the quiet that comes after truth has been spoken. The sun was setting, soft and golden, touching every petal with warmth. Julian reached for my hand. I let him hold it. Not as proof, not as permission, but as partnership. I walked the path Eleanor once dictated, past the windows where she used to watch and measure and judge, and I didn't look up. I didn't need her eyes anymore. This house, this life, this name, I had made them mine. Not by force, not by submission, but by presence, by staying when I was meant to disappear. She thought she could control my life. She thought silence was weakness. She thought I wouldn't fight because I didn't scream. But I never needed to raise my voice. I just waited until the only voice left in the room was mine. And now, the garden blooms in my name.